Do we have a dandy today? Happy Monday, everybody. Greg Sher with you. It's one-on-one. We have my good friend Jennifer McGuinness with us, CEO of Pivot Financial and a mortgage czarist. Is that right, Jen? Is that good?
That is your attempt of making czar female. I'm good.
Yeah, you gave me the order, and of course I follow your orders. And really delighted to have Tobias Peter on here. He's the co-director of the Housing Center at the American Enterprise Institute, also a senior fellow there. And Tobias, it's great to have you here on One-on-One.
Yeah, Greg, Jen, happy to be here.
Yeah, we're delighted. I'll be honest, I didn't really know a lot about what you did. I had heard of you before, but the MBA, the Mortgage Bankers Association, encouraged us all to find out a little bit about who you were and what you did when they had a post on LinkedIn just a couple of days ago, about a week ago, where in this report that you published on February 3rd, they encourage us to look at a slide, I guess we'd call it, or do we call it a half a slide? Because they took your slide and they cut it in half, and they asked us to look at this, and they made the argument by looking at this slide right here that you presented this graphic illustrating in a powerful way that the single bureau report can be safely and responsively implemented without impacting predictiveness of default. Is that what we're looking at here?
That's what we're looking at, yes. But the stuff that was cut out that we cover in this briefing was also that there would be a lot of unintended consequences with just going to a single score poll, and that could result in adverse selection and in particular gaming and in lower LPA revenues for the GSEs.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a minute. Let me rephrase my question. They said by looking at this chart, what it says is coast is clear for single pool. You're not going to have any more problems, any more defaults, is what they suggested through this. And that's what this says. I mean, their exact words. This graphic illustrates in a powerful way that single bureau credit reports can be safely and responsibly implemented without impacting predictiveness of default. Is that true or is that false?
Well, it's about half true, half false. It is true based on what we currently, in the current regime, it's true that when we look at the data, there is no noticeable difference between a tri-merge and just a single poll from the three respective bureaus. But of course, over time, people would figure out that they could get a better deal if they went with Bureau A because they get a slightly better score from that bureau, and hence that would ultimately over time deteriorate the quality of and predictiveness of default based on these scores.
Yeah, and I think what's important there.
This is the actual slide, Jen. This is the actual slide. If you want to pick it up from here.
Yeah. I think what's important there is a call out, right? Tobias, I'm sure you and I will agree that the word safety should never be used in an investment product, right? There are, differentiated opinions of what is considered to be safe and sound as it pertains to different underwriting guidelines, different products, different structures, and a vast array of other metrics. And I think, Greg, I'm just jumping in because I think what you're trying to ask Tobias is there more information in this report than just that slide, right? And I think Tobias is going to walk us through a lot more information. Fair to say?
Yeah.
To make sure we
I think that's fair to say. We can jump right into this first of four slides around the credit score debate, a single credit score model. And before you jump into this slide and tell us what it means, and then we'll go through all four, Tobias, what do you think of the single pool idea? What has your research rendered?
Yeah, I mean, it's the single pool was an idea that the NBA came out with in December 2025, I think. And there were a couple groups, notably the Community Home Lenders of America and the Consumer Data Industry Association, that pushed back against this idea for the reason that a single bureau pool could miss important information, and hence the borrower could be worse off. And particularly the CHLA stated that 20% of consumer data isn't reported to all three bureaus, and hence the tri-merge is really the safest way of ensuring and protecting the borrowers. And Also, that investors in MI they would face uncertainty, especially if you're dealing with a completely new regime going away from the tri-merge, and they would demand higher risk premiums and higher mortgage rates ultimately during this transition period until they've recalibrated the models. And hence, whatever you're saving on the front end by requiring only one credit pull instead of three, that would evaporate by having higher mortgage rates. Of course, the MBA pushed back against that through a series of blog posts saying that the, the MBA pushed back, saying that ultimately the tri-merge is no longer relevant these days, and the data that they had seen suggested that there was very little difference between the three bureaus in terms of the credit score that they were assigning to each borrowers. And hence, if you basically getting the same score, there's no point of having a tri-merge, because ultimately, if you have three identical scores, you end up at the same spot, but you're paying 3 times as much. And that was based on a conversation that they had with their large lenders and mortgage insurance companies. As far as I've seen, they never published any data. And correspondence that we had with the MBA said, yeah, we've just had conversations, but there was never any hard data. And then the MBA said, well, we can't release the data because the lenders, they are really bound by non-disclosure agreements with the bureaus that they can't make this information public, and hence they called on the credit bureaus to allow these firms to release the data. And we then looked at the data that we have from Intercontinental Exchange, ICE, and we found that for every originated loan, we actually know the 3 individual bureau scores. And if you have 2 borrowers, we actually have 6 individual bureau scores, and hence we can do the analysis that the MBA called for, and we can shed some light on this. And what we have that on the next slide, where we actually found that it's not true that these scores are nearly identical, but there's actually a very wide dispersion among them.
Jen?
Yeah, I think what'd be really helpful is let's bring up the slide for your findings on that, because I do think they're material. Greg and I have talked about this a lot, be it in whether it's posts or in podcasts, whatnot, that there is absolutely a dispersion across the different bureau scores. Greg, if you can go to the next slide, please. Do you want to just walk through this, Tobias? Because I do think that it's very important, because based on percentile, you're seeing, a shift between 26 to 61 points of deviation.
Yeah. So this slide here shows really the dispersion, and we, in the underlying data, we only have Bureau A, Bureau B, and Bureau C. We don't know which one is which. But for example, in the left panel chart, you can see the distribution, the difference between Bureau A and Bureau B for an individual that had an originated loan. And you can see Bureau A is slightly higher at about 5 points, but you can see the differences are as wide as 60, 70 points. And there's a bell-shaped distribution here. And hence, if you're allowing just a single pull, of course, as an individual, you would want to go with if with Bureau A you can get a score of 750, whereas with Bureau B you can get a score of 700. Of course, from a pricing perspective, you're much better off with Bureau A if you go with the 750 FICO rather than with the 700. And we think, and on the right panel chart, you can see that there's the dispersion is actually throughout the range. I mean, the MBA said for higher credit score borrowers that those differences are minimal, and to some extent they are true that there are larger differences for lower FICO borrowers. But at the upper end, for those above 800 FICOs, you still see that there's a wide dispersion, and the dispersion is as wide as 34, almost 40 basis points on the 95th percentile. So again, once the borrower figures out, and they can certainly before they apply for a mortgage, or the mortgage lender will tell them, hey, we're gonna do a soft pull and figure out, well, which one is the highest. That could ultimately result in score inflation, and people go selecting the score that gives them the the highest of the three.
So suffice to say that not all bureau data is created equal, and if you just throw, a dart at, a dartboard, that you're going to get the same number all the time, right? There is a dispersion. The bureaus do have different data. It is, and I'll put this out there again, I've said it before, it is a voluntary reporting process. So to date, the reason the tri-merge has been out there is to make sure that you're capturing as much data as is possibly available. So I think this is really good work from the aspect of you're looking at a large semblance of data, 2019 to 2025. I think that, understanding that there is a trajectory of deviation, and you came to averages of 26 to 61 points. I mean, that is a material difference when you're talking about the LLPA grid. So I think this is very interesting information. I think, Greg, if we keep going, there's more to unpack here with Tobias for sure.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I wanted to take a look at this because, Tobias, this is hot off the press. I mean, this is something that you've just given us eyes on. I'm not sure the public has even seen this yet. What are we looking at right here? Can you explain to us what this is and what the impact could be on the GSEs?
Yeah, so this is really the slide that follows the one that the MBA published, where here we highlighting the potential downsides of going with a single score. And the downsides we see is score shopping, score inflation, and lower LLPA revenue for the GSEs. And our analysis, again, using the same data, we're finding that due to the variation in scores that we just went through, even for borrowers with scores above 700 and above, 31% of these borrowers could move up one LLPA bucket by just selecting the highest bureau score versus the tri-merge. And 8% could move up 2 buckets, and 4% could move up 3 buckets, as Jen just went through earlier. And so that is that's a lot of borrowers where that could jump on the LLPA grid, and hence the GSEs would get less revenue. And when we quantify this impact from score shopping, and our assumption is that everyone will eventually do it because the industry figures this out. The industry is very good at figuring that stuff out. We estimate that this could reduce the GSE LLPA revenue by as much as 8%, or about $1 billion per year, just by going with a single score versus the tri-merge. And that's pretty significant. And of course, if all 3 bureaus were roughly coming out at the same score, that would not be an issue. But because of this dispersion that we've seen before, you have this occurrence. And then there's also a second wrinkle on this, which is shown on the upper right chart here. We find that Bureau A actually comes out more frequently on top than Bureau B and C. So
unpack that a little, Tobias. So you know how everybody says, oh, all bureaus are created equal, Greg. Like we see it all the time, and a vast array of LinkedIn posts and things. I think it's important to focus on this. When you think about voluntary reporting, look at A, B, and C. You see how the highest score on A is, A is always higher than B and C in this example, whereas the gap between B and C, and these are credit bureaus, guys. So let's make sure we're all on the same page here. Tobias, I just want to make sure the listeners understand. It's anonymous as to which one is Experian, TransUnion, or Equifax here. But that's the data, right? So one of the 3 is generally always higher in score in Tobias's work here than the other 2. And I think that's really important here too. But I mean, I think even away from that, Tobias, I want to unpack the chart below that. Mm-hmm. So when you're looking at that chart, I'm reading it as less than or equal to a 639 FICO bucket. 30% of that bucket, which is your lower echelon FICO score, could move up a full bucket, correct?
Correct.
I'm interpreting that correctly? And yes. 13% of that less than or equal to 639 bucket could move up 2 buckets, and 17% up 3 buckets. Now, my question is, think about modeling that risk, right? Trading desks today are very much used to the FICO score from the aspect of how it's modeled, produced, etc. And now, even away from, you used, generally the tri-merge FICO data here, But in order to see that, now imagine we throw in Vantage with some of the other new modeling. I think you would actually see these buckets move even more, just based on some of the additional, model modifications. Do you disagree?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, and we've did the same table with classic FICO versus Vantage 4.0, and we basically found the same thing, that a lot of borrowers, if you allow them the lender choice to go with the higher score, we find that similarly a lot of borrowers would be able to move up. And in terms of GSE LLPA revenue loss, that we're estimating that at about 1.5 billion per year by going with lender choice, classic FICO versus Vantage 4.
Yeah,
So
and I've seen research, and we've also conducted our own research. And depending upon the research group, the deviation there is not big. It's somewhere between 1.5 to 2.1 billion, which is significant. And I'll ask you, as the researcher behind this report, do you think that the GSEs are just going to be okay losing $2 billion to buyers? So you think they're going to adjust their LLPA grids to charge more?
well, that's above my pay scale here.
Yeah.
But
I think it's common sense,
yeah,
obviously, right? Yeah.
yeah. I mean, Bill Pulte, I think he kind of said that he didn't want to touch the LLPA matrix, and especially have separate LLPA matrices for classic FICO versus Vantage 4. But of course, the implication is that he would be fine with accepting lotless revenue for the GSEs, which of course, if you want to take them private, can be somewhat problematic.
Right, but also knowing about, and I'm sure you've done this deep dive just like I have, knowing about, classic FICO versus FICO 10T versus Vantage 4. Let's just go with, FICO versus Vantage. The models are not the same, right? And there's very different details to what are behind those models. I think one that always sticks out for me is, FICO will not use less than 6 months worth of data, whereas Vantage will use one. For me is an issue, and there's a lot of other calibrations that happen. I think another one that stuck out for me like a sore thumb was that their base on their prime borrower category or prime score category was 661, and the market has never accepted a 661 FICO as a prime borrower.
Yeah.
Tobias, let's look a little deeper on this slide here. This is how predictive is Vantage Score 4.0 compared to classic FICO, and right here on bullet 3, our analysis found that much of the reported advantages comes from methodological inconsistencies and selection bias. Once these issues are corrected, the purported performance advantage of Vantage Score 4 largely disappears. When I look at this on top of what has come out in the last couple of weeks, that FHFA never wanted Vantage Score going back several years ago, to me, Vantage Score, who I've not heard anything from in the last couple of months as they've been getting this pushback, not looking so good right now. I mean, do you agree with that Vantage Score is losing some steam?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, I'm more interested on the data side and the unintended consequences, right? I mean, I'm on the business side. I don't have necessarily an opinion or insights.
Well, let me rephrase the question then. If does Vantage Score give the secondary market as much protection as a FICO score based on your analysis?
Yeah, I mean, just yesterday we talked to someone from New York who is very active in this sphere, and he said that currently, if you're trying to sell a pool of loans that use Vantage Score versus classic FICO, they're trading at about 25. The interest rate is about 25 to 30 basis points higher. So the market is demanding a risk premium to compensate for using Vantage over FICO, and kind of for a lot of these guys, their models are built on classic FICO. And
I'm sorry, Tobias. I just want to jump in there. Greg and I actually had a conversation recently about this, and I said there would be the unknown risk adjustment, right? I mean, you just quantified it with a conversation yesterday, right? I apologize for the interruption.
Yeah. I mean, it's not to say that Vantage Score is not predictive or anything, and we actually have done some research on that where we looked at loans that had a 650 FICO score, classic FICO score, and a 750 Vantage Score. And we looked at, what we found was that if that was the case, they actually performed like a classic FICO score that had a 700 score. So they kind of performed in the middle. So, kind of both model had something, it seems something, both models were equally right or equally wrong, right? And the truth
Right,
was
but
somewhere in
I
the
think
middle.
there's something though that's important here, right? Because we keep talking about classic FICO, and I get that when Pulte said the wave is open, he said classic FICO and Vantage 4, but the reality is that FICO has a newer model. It's 10T, right? And the 10T model is actually what was approved back in 2021 into 2022 when Vantage was also tested. And I think, we spend so much time because of how Pulte announced what's allowable or can be allowable if it happens, talking about FICO Classic versus Vantage 4. But the reality is we should be talking about FICO 10T versus Vantage 4, right? Because we're, one 30-year-old model versus a more current model. It's not really a fair kind of discussion to have, at least in my humble opinion.
Yeah. I mean, in my opinion, and what we've been hearing is that that's forthcoming within months now, that the GSEs should be releasing the same data as they have for Vantage 4. So we can directly test 10T versus Classic versus Vantage 4. And we can see, on an individual loan basis, well, which one actually performs best. And but talking to FICO, they say, well, 10T is going to blow classic FICO out of the water. So,
Well,
I'm
I
always
think
curious
the
if that's
reason
true.
for that,
But
yeah. So I'm one of those like pre-game, don't reactively figure things out kind of girl. And there's a reason for that. One of the things that Vantage really set them apart from FICO in the beginning stage was rental data, utility data, this and that, right? Well, FICO 10T's model has that too. Plus, it also has 30 years of knowledge base behind it. And look, I'm not married one way or the other at the end of the day. The market will choose what they want to use when. But I think it's important that, you also have to have longevity. One of the questions I'd love to hear your thoughts on, Tobias, right? And this is more just on a, a thought process, not necessarily the business side of things. Is one of the things that MBA keeps talking about is, they don't want there to be this monopoly any longer on credit scores and credit bureau data. But the way that I see it, and I just talked about this with Greg the other day, is right now we have four entities. Okay, we've got Experian, Equifax, TransUnion, and FICO. Okay, granted, to produce the score you need the three different bureaus, but FICO is an independent entity, and then each of the bureaus are also independent entities. Now you look at Vantage 4, all three of the credit bureaus in joint venture own a percentage of Vantage. And I may not be the smartest girl on the block, but when I look at that, I feel like we're creating monopolies. We're not necessarily taking them apart. And I was curious, just being, an analyst, what your thoughts are there. Do you see that also as a conflict, or do you disagree?
yeah, I mean, it's certainly, it certainly raises questions, right? But the three bureaus, are also monopsonies, right? Because they're the only sellers of this data.
True, but
Um,
there's three of them, right? And the
there are
way
three
that
of
they
them.
compete today is capturing more of the voluntary reported data, right? So that's really their competitive advantage against each other today, allegedly, right? But my point is just generic entities to me, the math doesn't make sense. But I'm a data geek like that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of, I can see the administration is very concerned about affordability, and they want to do something to lower the cost. But ultimately, the cost of the credit score in the taken against the totality of closing cost, it's a relatively small percentage. It's not to say that you can't squeeze anything out there, but there are a lot of unintended consequences, and if you in the process raise the cost of the mortgage rates by 25, 30 basis points, it's going to cost borrowers much more than the saving of $100 at the front end.
Yeah,
Is
and
the
I think
front is the one credit score the solution, in your opinion, Tobias? Single
Um,
pool.
I don't think so right now. I mean, I can see we are still. I can see if you, for example, I'm very concerned about the gaming aspect. And if you could somehow solve the gaming aspects, for example, by randomly selecting one of the three bureaus, kind of similar what the VA does with its appraisals, where they have all their pool of appraisers, and then they randomly assign appraiser to do that property. So there's no relationship between the appraiser and the lender. That a model like that may work and take the gaming out of it. But of course,
But does it? So, but does it though? Because if you go back to your slide with like, Bureau A, B, and C as an example, right? And you have, that A's score is always, exponentially higher than B and C, let's call it in the output in that visual. Greg will find it here in a minute. But when you do that, if you're going round robin, and you just pick A, then B, then C, is that really fair to the borrower, right? The
yeah,
borrower that draws B or C as an example.
yeah, I mean that would have been my next point. It's some borrowers could really end up could end up worse off than before.
Well, I mean, that's
With
the
the time.
definition of disparate impact, is it not? Right? You don't necessarily want to create disparate impact.
I mean, yeah, kind of. If you wanted to reduce the gaming, that's one solution. If you randomly select the bureau, but
Yeah.
of course, there are many other consequences that need to be thought through. And right now, I don't have an answer if we can really solve all these issues. But
Well, I'll throw out
Yeah.
my feedback that when I was asked the question to you and see what you think. Today, reporting to the credit bureaus is voluntary. I said mandate that all debt counterparties have to report to all three of the big three credit bureaus, right? And then now you've got competition. They've got to clean up the data. They've got to, have it reportable. They have to make it easy to use, etc. And, now they have to fight and see who's going to be number one, right? And in theory, Tobias, if you reran it, and this obviously doesn't exist today, right? If you reran it, you should find the same data, right, across the three bureaus. And if all three bureaus had identical data, then you're probably in a place where you might be able to.
Why would you need all three at that point?
No, that's my point. You would.
Yeah, that they would start lowering their costs.
Yeah, that's what
They'd
I'm
start
saying.
lowering their
You'd be in a
costs, and then
place where they'd have to compete for business because you'd be able to create the score without all three of them because they'd all have the same data.
Yeah. So Jen, I mean, I think the question is the lobbying arms of these three enterprises. Will they even can that even get anywhere close to going across the finish line with all that would be at stake?
I don't know. I think it remains to be seen. I did see that you tagged the free universe of all of them today on LinkedIn, Greg, and I haven't seen anybody respond. Have they? You would know.
Yeah, no. Vantage Score is missing the mark right now. They're very quiet. Pulte gave them a shot at the plate. They see reports like this. They hear pushback that FHFA never wanted them in the first place. Nary a word at Vantage Score. And as I told you prior to going on here, Jen, their silence speaks very loudly in this moment. Tobias, I want to ask you a question that I asked Jen on a podcast. I think it was last week. It seems like we're on a lot of these together, and I'm loving her company, by the way. What a brilliant mind. The question is, let's just say 2 months from now, this is in effect. It's single pool time. Based on all the research that you have at your fingertips and your belief, how problematic would it end up being in the long term? Some people have said it could create the kind of crisis we haven't seen since the great financial crisis. To the extent that you can comment, the floor is yours.
That's a good question. I haven't really thought about it much, to be honest. But kind of that on the LLPA front, it's certainly meaningful. The question is ultimately how would the investors react, right? Would they just demand a higher risk premium, and if so, how much?
What's your answer to that? How do you feel about that?
Yeah,
yes,
I think they definitely would, right?
So you said yes to that. You said yes to LLPAs getting train wrecked, and eventually those would be elevated. I believe you said you think that interest rates would go up, right? So, I mean, that's the trifecta. That's Armageddon right there. So I think
Well,
what
I
you're
have one
saying,
more. I have one more.
yeah,
And if rates were going up and all those things were happening, Tobias, I assume you agree that the bond buyer would be demanding higher yields as well.
Oh yeah.
yeah.
So that's what we were
Tobias,
talking about, Greg, right?
Yeah.
On our other discussion,
Yeah.
right? You would see the whole loan buyer demand more. You'd see the bond buyer demand more. You'd see more the LLPA grid shift. Same thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's the point of our report and our work here is we just don't want to rush into anything, right? We want to think these unintended consequences through before we make changes, and to the extent we can provide data to very sharp minds and kind of get the debate rolling. That's what we ultimately want to do.
well,
Right. And I
you got
think
it rolling
that,
for sure.
yeah.
Does this feel rushed to you? I mean, that's really what you're saying. I mean,
Yeah,
that's what Jen said. And you feel like this is rushed too, correct, Tobias?
I feel it's a little bit rushed. I mean, it feels a little bit rushed, and kind of I can see the administration why they want to do it, but
Well, is it the administration, or though, Jen, or is it the MBA? Which is it?
Oh, I think in general, people are looking to try to effectuate change in the housing market. The MBA is obviously calling for single pull. The administration is calling for people to be able to get more homes, but they got to do a lot of work for that. The one thing I wanted to circle back on is Tobias. I want to see if you agree. Greg said, Jen said. I'm going to tell you what Jen said, even though I'm talking about myself in the third person. I said before something like single pull or lender's choice should be implemented, the real and full up and downstream analysis on the data, the structure, the impact needs to be completed with the proper market participants involved before something like this should be called for. That's what Jen said. Do you agree or disagree with that?
No, I mean I agree. I mean there's a lot of as we've just uncovered, there's a lot of issues, downstream issues that I don't think are fully thought through. And part of it is that we never had the data, but it turns out we actually have a lot of data where we can illuminate this conversation. And so yeah, I'm hopeful that we're not going to rush into anything that we're going to regret. And
It doesn't seem like the MBA is pulling back, though.
Yeah, I mean that's a question for them. I mean, like ultimately,
you have open lines of communication with them. What are they saying to you about this? Are they saying you're not right, or is it a discussion? What is that? What are those conversations like?
Yeah, I mean, we're talking to them about the research that we find and the unintended consequences of all this, and I think they are open to kind of to better ideas. It's just that no one has really come up with something that would square the circle here, where you would be able to lower costs, where you would reduce the potential for gaming, and then at the same time have something that is leaves no borrower worse off, and also not increases rates over the long term. So
I think there's an easy way to do that, not to completely turn this on its head. And the easy way to do that is start to work toward reining in insurance related costs and tax hikes, right? And that will really help affordability for borrowers. As Greg, I'm sure you can attest, sitting in a direct lender, taxes and insurance are killing borrowers today. There's many a borrower that has the income to support the mortgage payment, even with the higher interest rate, but the tax and insurance, et cetera, costs are really dragging them down to Florida and California, lots of different places.
Yeah, my best idea is to sunset capital gains for a short period of time, 2 years. Encourage people, give them incentives to get out of the houses, start to trade a little bit more. This has been great, Tobias. I want people to start to read your publication more. I thank the MBA for bringing it to light. I am now going to be an avid monthly reader. Tell our listeners where they can get a hold of this comprehensive report that covers all of housing. This particular document, 53 different slides packed with insights.
Well, thank you, Greg. Yeah, I mean, we do these monthly briefing calls if you go to ai.org/housing, you get on our landing page, and you can sign up for it. Every month we cover different topics that are relevant to the mortgage, to the finance system, but also to housing supply, to anything else that is new in our research front. You can also reach out to me directly, tobias.peter@ai.org, if you can find, and I'd be happy to put you on our distribution list.
Yeah, one thing that I found really unique about what you do is no paid research. So no one ever has to worry that data you're putting out has been paid for. That is huge. Believe me, that's the first thing I scratch my head about and wonder when I see these reports. So you are a third party, you're unbiased, and you also take no money from the government. So that's big. Put you on the spot here, Tobias. Take off this hat for a minute. Based on what you know, do you think that the single pool is going to happen?
I don't think so.
Okay,
But,
I don't either. Jen?
Well, I hope not, but I've seen crazier things legislated through X, right? But look, I think there's a better way, and I also don't think that it's in the best interests of the mortgage industry to be using FICO Classic next to Vantage 4. If we're gonna have more than one scoring methodology, we need to get to FICO 10T.
Yeah,
right?
Where are you, Vantage Score? Hey, Vantage Score, are you out there? Let's call for a side-by-side. That's what you thought you were getting into anyway. Why aren't you talking?
I mean, if
Tobias,
you recall,
Peter.
I was on a podcast, and I said that I would happily interview Vantage and FICO together, right? And have that conversation with everybody all at the same time. And it's been crickets, Greg.
Well, maybe we can make that. Now that people know that we're best friends with Tobias, Peter, maybe we can make that happen. What do you think?
That would be great.
That should move the needle.
He did go to the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government. So one of the smartest minds around.
Don't hold it against me.
Oh, no, we won't. Believe me. And that's Harvard's a beautiful place too. Closest I get to Harvard is my son's flag football tournament every summer. Tobias, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. And we look forward to following what's going on at the AEI Housing Center.
Greg, Jen, pleasure to be on. Thanks for having me.
Thanks very much.
Enjoy your Monday, everybody. So long. Bye-bye, Jen.
Bye.